Welcome to the SAFeTY Chronicles, exploring how to keep people and pets safe from the cycle of interpersonal violence. I am your host, Allie Phillips, founder and CEO of Sheltering Animals and Families Together, the SAFeTY Program, a nonprofit organization working with domestic violence shelters to eliminate the pet housing barrier to safety. As the founder, I have led the global movement in helping domestic violence shelters create on-site pet housing while elevating the criminal justice response to how animal abuse links to crimes against people. I am a former prosecuting attorney, internationally recognized legal expert and public speaker, award-winning author, and advocate for protecting vulnerable victims. In this podcast, we will explore how and why animals are harmed in the cycle of family violence and the human-animal bond that keeps victims in harm's way with their pets. Guest speakers and I will share strategies for shelters and professionals working to safeguard survivors, why pet-inclusive sheltering is life-saving, and safety tips for those who need help. None of the content will be graphic. If you are in harm's way, please contact your nearest domestic violence shelter or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of the SAFeTY Chronicles, and I've got a treat for us today. And I wanted to wait until I was a little further into this podcast so that you weren't the first one. I wanted to have enough followers so that people could really understand, when we're talking about the link between violence to animals and people, what the heck we're talking about. So, Phil, thank you. Thank you for being here. I've got my coffee and my cat coffee cup. Do you have a coffee cup?
No, I'm working on some water right now. I have my coffee
Okay.
this morning. Thanks. Yeah,
All
so
right. That's
already
okay.
wired. Yeah.
Yep. If I do not start with my cat coffee cup, then it's not a good day. So I've already gotten started here. So I'm just going to do like a little introduction, and then I'm going to let you introduce yourself because there is so much that we can talk about, but I'm hoping that we can hone in on a couple of things that I'm even curious about. So, Phil Arkow, you are the president and the secretary of the National Link Coalition, and I'll let you explain what that is. You are also a writer extraordinaire. You write the ever-growing National Link Coalition monthly newsletter it's basically a book each month. It is packed with so much information. You have taught literally around the world to all different audiences. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we met in 2007 when I started working for the American Humane Association, running their public policy office just outside of DC. So we've been on the merry-go-round many, many times together, been at conferences many times together. I think the only time we see each other is maybe when we're at a conference or we're running through an airport. So I would love for you to introduce yourself and introduce yourself to the audience.
Thanks, Allie. Yeah, I got started on this link approach back in the 1980s. And I actually brought the link to American Humane. I think it was in the early 1990s. American Humane at the time was the only national organization that had a child protection and animal protection division, but they weren't talking to each other. They were in their silos. And it was only through the humane education department that we were able to at least try to bridge that gap and get them talking. And both you and I got involved with American Humane at that time. American Humane has since, divested itself of its child protection work. But anyway, I got involved largely because of a bizarre, single incident that turned a light bulb on in my head. I was the only delegate from the humane movement within AVMA, American Veterinary Medical Association. I was on their animal welfare committee, and this was back in the late 1980s. And I saw 60,000 veterinarians having a hard time, proving to the rest of the world that they were real doctors. Okay, so I was in Colorado Springs. I was the education publicity director for the Humane Society of the Pikes Peak region. And I brought a group of local teachers in for some in-service training. I brought a local practitioner in to talk about pet care. And I said, Doc, every teacher in this room is mandated by Colorado law to report suspected child abuse. I know everybody in human health care is a mandated reporter, but what about veterinarians? And he said, yeah, well, I have to report too. Turned out Colorado was the only state that had the foresight, largely because of the altitude. You can see farther out there. Um, Only state that had the foresight to recognize that veterinarians might, in fact, see abused children. I thought, wow, that's great. I said, let me take that one step further. Would you have to report animal cruelty to us at the Humane Society? And he said, no, why would I ever want to do that? I might lose a client. And I thought, what's wrong with that picture? Shouldn't the veterinarian be as proactive in responding to animal abuse as pediatricians are responding to child abuse? And that rolled around in my head for years, just trying to figure out what to do with it. And then you and I and Randy Lockwood and Frank Ascione and a number of other people, we're all been working independently on this. American Humane brought us all together, put us into a hotel room in 2008, and we created the National Link Coalition. And the link stands for the fact that animal cruelty is not a standalone. It is one of the four forms of family violence, and it is linked to child abuse, domestic violence, and elder abuse, and they overlap. And anybody working in any of those fields can see the others. Types of abuse. And we're encouraging professionals in all those fields to get out of their silos, to cross report, to be generally familiar with the other types of abuse, and know how to recognize, respond, and make a referral to the other agency. And our motto is very simple: when animals are abused, people are at risk. When people are abused, animals are at risk. It's as simple as that.
So, what you described is very similar to how I got involved in this because I was seeing it in the courtroom as a prosecutor, and no one was talking about this. And I mean, you and I could talk all day about how animal abuse has not been taken seriously, even with the growth of laws. And I think that has seriously changed in the last 5 to 10 years. But back when we all, really got started, it just wasn't taken seriously. And so I started thinking about, the study of animal abuse and how it links to violence against people. Do you know when the first study was? Because I'm thinking it could track back to the mid 1970s. Do
Well,
you
yeah,
know?
well, it just depends on how you want to measure it. I mean, philosophers have been talking about this since Ovid and since, St. Francis of Assisi and Descartes and way back. First, general studies, the McDonald Triad from 1973, I think it was, which showed a linkage between child abuse or children who were exposed to animal cruelty, bedwetting, and arson. And there seemed to be connections there. Um, but today, just fast forward, our bibliography on our website, nationallinkcoalition.org, has over 2,400 citations. Okay. And the research is growing dramatically. And the point of all this, and the point of the prosecution aspect, is that legislators at all levels don't give a damn about animal welfare. I mean, there's only a few eccentric, dedicated, legislators that are real animal lovers. For most of them, human needs are always going to come first. And it's just a given condition. You can argue all you want about animal rights and the moral need to do this. The fact is that doesn't resonate with a legislator who's got a budget to deal with and human service agencies clamoring for more support. And let's face it, they're all great agencies that, need a lot of help. So by reframing the animal welfare message and basically going back to where this began in the 1820s, or actually even philosophically further back, that animal abuse certainly is a crime against animals. And yes, it's a crime that needs to be prosecuted in the courts. But by demonstrating how it hurts people, okay, legislators, prosecutors, judges, funders, the public starts taking more notice. And we have made a lot more progress with the laws since we started talking this up in the 1990s than any other approach towards animal welfare is taken. And I'll give you some examples. Back in the early 1990s, only 5 states had felony level animal cruelty. Today, all 50 do. Doesn't mean they're all enforced. Doesn't mean every county has, a dedicated prosecutor. But more and more, governments are recognizing, yeah, we got to pay attention to this. And there are now dedicated prosecution units in a growing number of cities, usually larger cities, larger counties, dedicated to the specialty practice of animal cruelty enforcement. We have over 140 law schools now that teach animal law, as a specific topic. And of course, this fits into that. Sex with animals used to be considered, just a normal thing. Always happens in, in rural areas, and boys will be boys. Sheep will be scared, as I sometimes whimsically say. Well, that's now illegal in 49 states because people recognize that animal sexual abuse is linked with child sexual abuse and child pornography. What's the one state that's the outlier?
I was just going to ask you who's the state that we need to go after?
I don't know how long this podcast will remain on live, but as of now, which is April 2025, West Virginia is still holding out. And I
Oh,
have,
come on, West Virginia. You can do it. Come
yes, you can.
on.
New Mexico
Wow.
finally came on board last year. Some of the other laws that we're seeing, and you in the domestic violence field, have been instrumental in all this. This process started in 2006 in Maine, and it's a case of one woman who can make it, who can still make a difference. She testified that on her farm, it wasn't just the dogs and cats that had been abused by her husband at the time. It was the livestock as well. And Maine became the first state in the country, and the first place in the world, to enact what we call pet protection orders, which are laws that specifically allow courts to include animals in domestic violence protection from abuse orders. And by specifying that they're in there, it draws attention to the fact that animals are more than property. There's this emotional attachment, and that the animals are harmed, as coercive control to get the rest of the family to stay under the thumb of the abuser. We now have either 41 or 42 states that have pet protection orders. Reason I say 41 or 42, as of this moment, Georgia has enacted the law, but we're waiting to see if the governor signs it or vetoes it. So, okay, so we're making tremendous progress there. Speaking of coercive control, that's one of the new directions in the domestic violence field in general, recognizing domestic violence isn't just physical abuse, it's emotional abuse and financial abuse. And there are various forms of coercive control that are used to keep usually the women and the children. It's usually a male abuser, but not always, to keep them under control. Well, we now have 21 states in which these acts of animal cruelty intended to uh, hurt, or intimidate the other members of the family. It's defined as either domestic violence or coercive control. And it's a global movement too. We have 6 states in Australia with similar legislation. We also have laws like this in the UK and Spain. So, I mean, it's just
Yeah.
remarkable progress.
Yeah, that was my previous podcast before this one was talking about the trend toward defining that abusing animals in the context of family violence is coercive control.
Yeah.
And like you said, states and other countries are coming on board, getting the legal definition, which is so important because you have to have the right laws and the right language in order for law enforcement and prosecutors and judges to do their job and literally see it all the way through to the end.
Yeah. And there's another legal strategy that's quickly catching on along the very same lines. I have been in animal shelters where one party brings the animal in to put it up for adoption, so the other party doesn't get it in the divorce settlement. Because animals, like it or not, are property. And when it comes down to, a property distribution in the divorce settlement, who's going to get the dog? Who's going to get the cat? We now have 8 states in which courts can specifically award custody of the animals. That's not so unusual. What is unusual is that they can award custody in what the court determines to be the animal's best interests.
I love that because it's really recognizing that animals are sentient beings and that Professor David Favor out of Michigan State University's law school, who by the way just retired last week. It's like,
Hmm.
dude, like
Yeah.
he's an icon. I mean, over 40 years in the field, and he just announced his retirement. But that was his big thing that he wrote a lot of law review articles, did a lot of research, compiled a lot of information that, like you said, animals are property under the law, but this is not your refrigerator. This is not your toaster or your car that you need to have a judge help you in dividing up the assets. This is a sentient being. And goodness knows, my cats are here stalking me, like micromanaging me to make sure that I do a good job here. They have all, like, they have all the feelings that we have, and they feel pain and jealousy and joy and all of that. So that is a very, very interesting trend that
Yeah.
it's
And
happening.
then Yeah, and then another trend. I mean, going back to that one vet way back when who said he wouldn't report animal cruelty because he might lose a client. It is literally taking us 40 years to get the veterinary profession to
Yeah.
begin to recognize, hey, we do have a responsibility and to get safeguards in place and legal protections. And we now have 43 states in which veterinarians are either mandated or at least permitted to report suspected animal cruelty, abuse, and neglect. And in 36 of those states, they have immunity from civil or criminal liability if they make a good faith report, which was a big obstacle there. I mean, that's tremendous progress, and we're still
Yeah.
working, of course, on the other remaining states. And then, of course, you're looking for other progress. You've only got 300 domestic violence shelters that are, pet inclusive right
Oh,
now. Hey.
400. Yeah, 400. Canada is exploding. Oh, I can't even keep up with what Canada's doing. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, I counted 62 in Canada. I think I looked at the list the other day.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's
amazing.
fantastic. So, when it comes to the actual research, like you said, coercive control, that is a new area. Um, Mary out of the UK, Mary, what's her
Mary
last?
Wakem, Mary
Yes, Mary
Wakem.
Wakeham, out of the UK, has been writing about this. I've been reading her stuff on that. Do you see any other trends in where the research is going? Because it's the research that helps us with legislators, helps us with laws, helps us, like especially in my field, with fundraising, so that the shelters can actually tell funders, we're not making this up. This is not one of Allie's crazy ideas, or the National Link Coalition has been having too many martinis and they came up with a crazy idea one night. No, there's like research that is going after some of these precise topics. Is there anything on the horizon or anything happening right now where we're actually getting data? We're getting some research.
Yeah, and I'll tell you where we have some gaps in the data.
Oh, good.
First of all, if you go to our bibliography, it's a nationallinkcoalition.org, you'll see, and it's all broken out by various topics. Okay. And it's bullying and it's child sexual abuse and it's in prosecutions and therapeutic interventions for animal cruelty offenders and elder abuse and child abuse and so on. The two main areas where we're seeing most of the movement right now is in domestic violence research about how animal abuse is linked to, domestic violence, and also in veterinary forensics, which is a new exploding area. And we're training veterinarians. I co-teach a course through the University of Florida on animal abuse and human violence through the veterinary forensics program there. And we now have several hundred veterinarians around the world who are specialists in doing animal CSI, if you will, to identify what happened to the animal. So it makes the prosecutor's job easier in getting a cruelty case convicted. So those are the two main, areas. What is most inspiring is where this research is now coming from. And yeah, Mary Wakeham and a number of researchers in the UK, Canada, New Zealand, okay, the Anglophone countries are leading the charge, plus the US, of course. But we are seeing a tremendous growth of research in what we're calling now link deserts, countries around the world that I've just caught on to this concept. And there's one lonely researcher in Kazakhstan or in, that just crossed my desk this week, okay?
Wow.
Or Ecuador or Guatemala or Serbia, okay? And they're coming out with research. Ukraine, I mean, in the middle of a war, they're doing research on veterinary forensics. It's absolutely amazing. So we're seeing more. We did a compilation there. I think it's 28% of the research in our bibliography now is coming in from other countries, and they're coming from 51 different countries around the world. So the link movement is truly going global. And that's just, really inspiring.
So with that, is there any like what because you've been in this field for so long, is there anything that you're seeing that makes you stop and think, wow, that is really progressive in what they are doing, whether it has any research backing it? Like are you seeing any policies or agencies or, any professionals going off on a path that is basically going to be the next frontier of the link?
Yeah, well, I mean, the veterinary forensics field for one, veterinary social work, new program, relatively new program, started I think 12 years ago now. The University of Tennessee collaboration between the School of Social Work and the veterinary college. Um, and we now have, I believe it's 400 veterinary social workers either in the field or in training right now to work in veterinary hospitals and veterinary clinics to deal with where the real problems are, which is at the upper end of the leash. Veterinarians are exceptionally well, and their staffs are exceptionally well trained in dealing with the animal issue, but
Mhm.
they've never received training on how to handle the human element. And in many cases, they've gone into veterinary medicine because they don't want to work with people. They want to work with animals, okay? And the people are the real problem. Putting veterinary social workers in that environment solves a lot of these issues. And one of the four pillars of veterinary social work is this link between animal abuse and human violence. They're also working in grief management, compassion fatigue. Veterinarians have one of the highest rates of suicide right now. So, I mean, there's whole wellness issues in veterinary practice. And so veterinary social workers have a lot of work to do there. And now that's being slowly ramped up into extending this field into animal shelters because animal shelters are dealing with the exact same issues as veterinary hospitals and they need the social work support. And so we're starting to see a few animal shelters starting to employ veterinary social workers. So I mean that's one field that we're seeing a lot of movement in.
That is really interesting that that's moving into shelters, and it just made me think of humane education. Is that still alive and kicking, or is it, or if the shelters in particular are having to choose where their resources are best put, is it more toward veterinary social work? I don't even know if you know or have an opinion on that.
I don't have any honest information on that. I will tell you that I spent 20 years as a full-time humane educator. I was one of the first six full-time humane educators in the country. Um, I know that when the recession hit in 2008, the first thing that got cut at humane societies everywhere was humane education, which made absolutely no sense because I mean that's the mandate and the purpose for why these shelters were created. I also know that we've been doing humane education in the U.S. since George Angell, founded the Massachusetts SPCA in 1868, and we've yet to prove that it actually works or has long-term benefits.
Mm.
Okay. I know that a lot of shelters, still have humane education. There's a great organization, APHE, the Association of Professional Humane Educators. Um, when I started, there were six of us in the country. There's now several hundred. I mean, that's an encouraging sign. Um, but um, whether that is addressing the human element as much as the animal element, I don't know. I don't think it is. I think it's still focused more on the moral aspect and the animal rights aspect of caring for animals.
Yeah. So you mentioned that there are some areas where we are lacking in link informed professionals.
Yep.
I have my opinion where we're lacking. I would love to know where you think we need to fill some gaps.
Target number one is social work.
Hmm.
Okay. We did a study a little while ago of all, there are 889 social work programs in the United States. Less than 3 dozen even mention the human animal bond in the curriculum. Not even just animal cruelty, just the fact that clients have animals and that the emotional attachments that people have to their animals um, affects their well-being, their quality of life, their decision making. Okay. People won't go into hospital or long-term care if there's nobody to take care of their animals. If
Oh,
they got
yeah.
limited money, they'll feed their pets instead of themselves.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. And we see it in the evacuation of natural disasters. I think where it really hit home was Hurricane Katrina.
Yep. Yep. But
And
I
yeah.
mean, I'm in Western North Carolina. We just went through it with Helene, the wildfires in California, you name it. Hurricane Harvey, when it hit Houston a number of years ago, every single picture I saw on TV was an airboat floating down the streets of Houston with a black lab in the back. I mean, so yeah, people have the human animal bond, and I'm sure you've talked about that a lot on your podcast. But social workers don't know this. So
Mm.
we desperately need to reach out to schools of social work and practitioners in social work to say, hey, look, factor in, your definition of family needs to include the pets in that family
Oh,
or,
yeah. And
or farm,
and
farm animals, the livestock.
if you are a social worker and listening to this, or if you know of a social worker, would you please share this? Because here's the thing, the National Link Coalition, which I'm going to make sure, Phil, that we talk about this, is full of professional trainers and educators. We can get y'all hooked up with the right information. So please share that. So thank you for sharing that. What's another gap that needs
Another
filling?
gap is we now have these pet protection orders in 41 or 42 states. We don't have a lot of information as to how often they're used.
Mm.
When Minnesota came out with their law back in 2010, they had data for 2 or 3 years and then they stopped collecting. The only state where we really have numbers is from New York State. And, I won't bore you with the details, but it's a steady climb. Once people know that these laws are on the books and courts are familiar with it and the attorneys are familiar with it and the divorcing, the victims or survivors are aware of it, people start taking, advantage of it. But we need more information just to know. Um, Another gap in the system is in what are called ACEs, which is a term that was coined a number of years ago to represent adverse childhood experiences. And it was a study by the Centers for Disease Control that recognized that early childhood trauma not only leads to lifelong emotional distress, but also leads to people adopting riskier behaviors, which winds up creating worse physical health, which leads to earlier death. Okay. Nowhere in that study did they include a child's committing animal cruelty or witnessing animal cruelty as an adverse childhood experience? It's a huge gap in the system.
Yeah.
And we know, for example, that a child's committing animal cruelty is one of the earliest indicators of conduct disorder. It starts showing up at about the age of 6.5. We know that a child's witnessing animal cruelty can be just as emotionally devastating as committing the act himself or herself. Um, and the child protection field has, you and I have differed on this, but I don't think they've really caught on to this, you
No, they
know,
haven't.
as the domestic violence field has. Domestic violence has seen the distinct need, people showing up at shelters
Mhm.
um, with animals in tow and not being able to get into the shelter. And thank you for helping them, to make that transition. The child protection field largely has yet to, see the relevance of this.
Yeah. What about you mentioned specific prosecution units that are skilled and trained and educated in animal abuse and how it links to family violence. I remember back in the day, I was tracking a lot of these units, because I was working for the National District Attorneys Association, and that was my shtick. That's what I did. But now when I go back to some of those offices, whether they are at a state prosecutor or like an attorney general's office, I'm not finding many of them. So where do we stand with that? Do you have an idea?
I don't have an accurate count, but you're right. Sustainability is a problem, and I think what causes this are a couple of things. One is sheer volume.
Mhm.
Okay. When suddenly, a large city, Houston, Harris County, Texas was a classic example. Philadelphia was a classic example. Suddenly, because the public wants animal welfare addressed. And when the public, addresses it, prosecutors have to respond. And so they were getting 5 and 6,000 cases a year. Okay. That's a huge volume. And you can't just pawn it off on the newest assistant district attorney. So it makes sense, and the laws involving animal welfare are incredibly complex. You can speak about that more than I can, okay? And prosecuting those cases is difficult. So it takes somebody with some specialized training and specialized awareness, and creating that unit, whether it's on a law enforcement agency like Lee County, Florida, is a great example in the Fort Myers area. Um, the sheriff's office there or in the prosecutor's office, and putting resources in there, it consolidates it, it makes it more effective. It gets elected officials reelected because they show, hey, we're in support of animal welfare, in our community. So the volume is one aspect of it. The electability is another aspect. And the third is if you have the animal lover who just graduated from Lewis and Clark Law School or whatever, or University of Denver, or one of the schools that is really leading the charge in some of these areas, and it just wants to do something. So we have a new, young, bright, assistant district attorney who wants, for whom animal welfare is an issue, and she, and it's invariably now a she, is pushing for, we need to be doing more, then new programs get started. But when that person moves on, when the budgets change, when the district attorney is elected out and somebody else comes in, when the state legislature changes, whatever, a lot of these programs unfortunately go by the wayside.
Yep, yep, and I've sadly seen that. And yeah.
Yeah.
What about link coalitions? I know on the National Link Coalition website there is a listing. Are those doing well? Are they growing? Are they declining? What's the status of the coalitions around the country and around the world?
Realistically, we have more coalitions listed on the website that are actually viable.
Hmm.
Uh, there's only a handful of them that have been able to sustain. We're seeing growing interest in other countries. Okay, Canada in particular, the UK, Japan, Italy, Spain, just to name a few, where they're really viable on the national level. Local ones have a difficult time because it takes time, it takes resources, it takes commitment, and the most valuable resource any of us have right now is time. And to get people to commit to going to a meeting once a month or once every other month or whatever, um, and to think outside the box, to break open the envelope and say, oh, my work could actually be easier if I take a little bit of work right now just to, build some relationships with these other people. It's a hard step for a lot of people to take in our, admittedly fractured, micro-focused, lifestyle these days.
Yeah. But have you seen a benefit? Because you wrote the toolkit on how to create a link coalition. Have you, in the past, seen a benefit from these animal and human protection agencies coming together and sharing information?
Absolutely. The New Mexico Link Coalition holds a conference every 2 years, brings in several hundred people from around the country, and the information exchange that goes on is phenomenal. In Western Massachusetts, the Human Animal Violence Education Network has monthly meetings, and they do the same thing on the local level. So, we have some examples of coalitions that are, there are a few more out there, but, it's networking, it's exchanging. I mean, it's all about relationships. And, regardless of what kind of an agency you're in, if suddenly you have a problem dropped in your lap, a client with that needs support for the pet, or an animal, whose owner is having, an abuse issue, and you don't know who to call, okay, you're not going to be likely to do anything, regardless of what the law might say. Um, if you know who to call and you've got that relationship established, it makes it easier. And by the way, we've come up with two other new developments to help facilitate that. One was a campaign on our website. We call it "Who You Gonna Call? Abuse Busters." Veterinarians were telling us, okay, you finally convinced me. I've got to report animal cruelty, but I honestly don't know who to report to in my area because there is absolutely no consistent system. It's not like the child protection or elder abuse, adult protection field where there are distinct agencies, or law enforcement, which takes care of domestic violence. So we created a directory for 6,500 cities and counties, and it's on our website. It's free. So no matter where you live, you know who you should call. Whether they do anything with it or not is another matter. Another new thing, we discovered an interesting website last year called mandatedreporter.com. And it's a website that, for who's reported mandated report domestic violence, child abuse, and elder abuse. Okay. State by state listings, who's required to report, what the training requirements are. Okay. Great. They forgot about animals. So we started working with them, and now we have a whole section on that website, mandatedreporter.com. Okay, state by state listings for animals cruelty. Who do you call, or who's mandated to call, and what are the training requirements? And then of course our directory is who to call.
Yeah, and I'll put links to that below so that anybody who's listening to this, you can just click on it. And whether you are, a professional who works with people or animals, and invariably you may come across somebody who discloses abuse. So it might be nice to know who you report to and just to get the ball rolling with that. So, what is one thing that still surprises you in this field, whether good or bad, something every day where you're like, isn't that interesting?
I had a wow just this week.
Do tell.
uh, Email came completely out of the blue. I mentioned I co-teach this, co-designed and co-teach this class at the University of Florida on veterinary forensics on the link. And I get this email from a woman who said, "You probably don't remember me, but I took your class 10 years ago. And I want to thank you for inspiring me on my journey. And I just spent the last 10 years kind of, floundering around in Florida, doing, basic veterinary work and decided I really needed to do something more. And I just moved to Canada and I'm working with a domestic violence shelter, doing veterinary work for the animals in the shelter." Wow. Okay. And I use that as an example of I have, a theory of education. It's called the Italian kitchen philosophy of education. Throw enough spaghetti on the wall and something's going to stick. And you just never know, when you're putting stuff like this out there, where it's going to stick. And years later, it will come back, with somebody who um, remembered something you said or something you did, or, he's able to say, I'm finally in a position where I can do something with this.
Yeah.
And that inspires me. That surprises me.
Yeah, that's amazing. And and I say all the time, we never know how the message is landing and how it could literally save a life. We being on the stage, speaking at conferences, we don't know unless somebody comes up to us, and it's pretty rare to get an email like that or to have somebody come up, but when they do, it's like, okay, you just put more gas in this car and I'm gonna keep going
Yep,
and doing
exactly right.
this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, last question. Tell everybody about the National Link Coalition and that awesome monthly newsletter you put together.
We're a nonprofit. We need donations. Please, please donate. We're at nationallinkcoalition.org. Um, We publish this free monthly newsletter. We work in four main areas. One is public and professional awareness, and we do trainings. We publish the link letter. We compile the academic research, which legitimizes all this. We celebrate and promote the great programs going on all around the country in all these different fields: the child abuse, domestic violence, elder abuse, prosecution, law enforcement, veterinary medicine, human medicine is a new area we're getting involved with, and then we do these and do professional trainings. So we've got a cadre of speakers available, as Allie mentioned, and Allie does a lot of these programs, and everybody on our advisory committee, is a national expert, a subject matter expert on all of this. So and we'll talk to anybody who will listen. Um, and so we're there for one purpose only, which is to protect animals and people and get people to recognize that they're all related. They are all linked together. And by pooling limited resources, we can all do a much more effective job and protect and save more lives.
Yeah. And the National Link Coalition was officially formed. What was it, June 2008? We were all in Portland, Maine.
Yep.
We sat in a room and said, what the heck are we all doing? Let's pull it together. And so we're coming up on the 17th. Do I have I done the numbers right? 17th anniversary?
Yep. That's about right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
again, people like you and me and a few others had actually been working on this for years and years before.
yeah.
But it was only in 2008 we all got together and said, let's pool our limited resources
Hmm.
and put together this ad hoc coalition.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like I think to all the trainings that just I have individually done, and when you look at the makeup of the National Link Coalition, the advisory committee, which pretty much we're all working at national level, so we have a national, if not an international impact. It has to be tens of thousands of trainings. I mean, it has to be over, over a lifetime of our careers of everybody involved.
Yeah, I mean, last time I counted, well, like last year, between all of us, we had done, it was close to 150 trainings just in one year.
That's just 1 year.
And that was just the ones we know about. I mean,
Yeah.
we don't hear about all of them. And that's just people within our, advisory committee and
Hmm.
related groups. So there are many more out there. And we're seeing new groups springing up all the time that are, adding into the training and doing the work. And I mean, it's really encouraging. It's growing organically.
Yeah. And with the amount of turnover that happens in these frontline agencies, I don't ever see the training getting to a point where it's like, we're done, we've done our job. We may have to pass the torch, but there's always turnover in animal and human, service agencies. So this is multi-generational work, and we are easily into the second generation of starting to do that. So yeah, do you ever see yourself retiring, or are you just going to drop right at the podium and it's like, I'm out, mic drop?
No desire to retire. I'm having too much fun, and the work is too important. And we're making too much progress.
Yeah. Yeah, and like like what we've been talking about, there's so much still to do, but yet when we look back, and you're really good at keeping the genealogy of the link, so much has already been accomplished that sometimes we're so looking ahead in the future of, okay, I've got this to-do list. We have all of this we have yet to do. But I think we need to pat ourselves on the back of how much has been done. I mean, I just look at it from, I got a prosecutor brain until the end of time. And I just look at what's happening in the field of prosecution. That's like, high five. Finally, things are moving, not everywhere, but there is momentum. So, a high five to you for being in this field for decades, not to age you, but I mean, you are one of the founders of this entire movement.
As are you, Allie, from from your perspective of prosecution and domestic violence shelters in particular. Um, but one of the things that sustains me um, is having realistic expectations. And it's exactly what you're just talking about. Everybody's got a to-do list and they got to get through all this stuff. And it's not just a case of looking back and saying, well, this is how far we've come. Isn't that great? It's also a case of realizing this kind of work takes time.
Yeah.
Big organizations move at glacial speeds. Getting a bill through a legislature can take 6 or 8 or 10 years.
Yeah.
Okay. And as long as you've got realistic expectations and just keep plugging away and you
Hmm.
take the victories where you can and realize, which battles are worth fighting and which ones aren't, and focus on, what brings people together and not what divides them.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, like I said, it's all about relationships and people can have different perspectives. But if you say, okay, we disagree on this, but we agree on this. So let's put this aside. Let's focus on this here. And how can we, create a program and things start happening?
Yeah. Well, that's a great note to end on. So, for everybody listening, I'm going to put some links below because no matter where you work or who you are or where you live, you're going to want to go to nationallinkcoalition.org and get on the newsletter. That's the secret sauce because even if you don't work in a field where you're going to come across human or animal victims of violence, you might want to know about the legislation that is happening in your state and in your community. And that's one of my favorite parts of the newsletter is how you track all the legislation. So I'm going to put those links below. Definitely get on the newsletter. There's nothing super shocking in it. It is just super informative, and you can find out what is happening in your state and maybe get involved with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you, Phil. It's been a real treat, and I just love hearing, you know, the past, the present, the future, and putting it all together, and just keep doing what you're doing. It's impactful.
As is what you're doing, Allie. We're both institutional memories here.
Absolutely. All
All
right,
right.
everybody. Thanks for listening. Have a good day.
Thanks, Allie.
If you are in harm's way and need help, please visit the Pet Inclusive Shelter listing at safetyprogram.org, call your nearest domestic violence shelter, or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Want to support our efforts and help us keep the Safety Startup Manual free for domestic violence shelters? Consider donating at safetyprogram.org/donate. Your donation saves lives.